Welcome everyone, and again apologies if anyone hasn't been able to make it live due to the last minute issue with the password. So I'm Joanne Law, Director of Mediation Institute, and I'm really happy to have one of our members, Mary Brindley, here today, going to be talking about grief-informed FDR and therapy. So Mary, I might let you share a little bit more about your history and why this is an area that's of such importance for you.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me talk. And I'm going to be sharing what I've learned about grief. I work in mental health, family violence, trauma, and I'm also a registered FDRP. I've been working in private practice since 2014, and I was become registered as a mediator soon after that time. I think it was 2000. So my overall interest is in how to make family life support rather than be a source of pain for children of separated parents. I have a belief that children's rights is an avenue for their voice to be amplified, and that the addressing of needs for both parents and children is lacking in some of our current models. So grief is quite a heavy topic. So what I'm hoping that we can do today is take on an exploratory type approach, and we engage in discussions and pose questions of ourselves. So I'm asking that we be reflective in our practice today and be interactive with that. I'm not going to go through each dot point here, but this is more to prompt some thinking. So I suppose my question as a starting point is, why would we want to look at grief in mediation? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Why grief might be important for us?
Is it important? Does everyone think, no, not relevant at all, I just accidentally had turned up here?
Yeah.
Sorry, it may be that the parties are both grieving but out of sync with their grief.
Yeah. It's sort of important, but it's hard to kind of balance because there's so much grief. Maybe. I suppose the other question is what's prevented us from looking at grief in mediation in the past. My thought is that we look at grief maybe is more, it belongs in a therapy room rather than in the mediation, or maybe we're not sure about how to incorporate the emotions in the room. Does anyone have any other thoughts on that?
I think there's often a fear of picking at the scab in a way that we think if we don't mention it, maybe it won't upset our process.
It won't explode.
Yeah, so it's probably fear of the practitioner in some ways.
This is a quote from the book. So the information that I'm sharing today is from the text called The Grieving Brain. It's published by Mary Frances O'Connor. She's a neuroscientist, a therapist, lecturer, and she also talks about having lived experience with grief, and that's what's prompted her to study what she has. So she talks about this book is for people who have lost a spouse, a child, a best friend, or anyone. It's also for anyone that's lost their job or they feel pain when a celebrity that they might admire has died. And she also talks that this text is also for those who are adjacent to someone who is grieving, to help us understand what's happening for them. So I guess I felt that this book was quite relevant to our work, but the challenge is, how do we then use it? She then says that she's motivated by understanding grief through a neurobiological lens, which enhances our understanding to be more holistic of grief and to engage with it, with the anguish and the terror of what grief is. And I particularly like that quote because I think when we think about grief, there is an element of terror in that. And how do we sit with that? So do we have any assumptions about grief at the moment, like before we go any further? What is it? And it happens for a while.
Put in the chat the fear of having to deal with emotions. We tend to find that uncomfortable, and it can cost time in mediation as well, where the timekeeper is always looking at the clock.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, definitely. Okay. Mary defines a difference between grief and grieving. She also starts off by talking about emotion. I think with our current studies, they're learning that emotion isn't what we thought it was. So as a starting point, without going too far into it, it's an interconnected experience that incorporates different parts of the brain. There is some central parts that are usually involved a lot, but it also involves our nerves all through our body, and also our endocrine system and our hormones and neurotransmitters. And they aren't necessarily connected to cognitions or our thoughts. They can sometimes be in parallel or even happen before. So they don't necessarily run along the same pathways. The thoughts might be doing one thing and the feelings might be doing something completely different. And the feelings are more of an experience of a process rather than it being, I don't want to get too bogged down on it, but I suppose it's important to just think that they're relevant. They're not a symptom of something. They're actually there for a reason.
Sorry, Mary, could I just... So are you saying the feelings aren't necessarily generated by the thoughts?
Yeah, they're not connected. Not always are they connected. And it would be hard for us, we wouldn't be able to look at a person and go, oh, that one's connected to a thought and that one's not. They often can occur before the person is even aware of them. So they happen on a subconscious level. When we see emotions in a mediation, what do we do? What are our standard processes, or how do we approach it? And I can imagine that people are going to do things differently. There's going to be a range of responses.
I'm nervous because I don't know if I'm remembering the training correctly, but I'm guessing acknowledge was the first step. That would be my go-to.
Yeah, okay. What do other people think? Yeah. There is the training, but there's also what's our automatic responses as well.
Yeah.
If they experiencing emotions subconsciously, what are we doing?
Yeah, and Nick's put in ear statements, so empathy, attention, respect. It's out of the workability.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's good to hear, because like sometimes when we speak to mediators, it can be, well, my job is not that of a therapist. So there's not even that space to even consider that might be happening in the room.
And Bonnie's shared, we might deal with our own emotions first, look within. So I suppose that emotional contagion, is that what you're thinking of, Bonnie?
Yeah, awesome. Hold on to that, because she talks about emotion contagion later on.
Oh.
She defines grief as the emotion of grieving. It's an experience. It is a moment in time, so it's an episode. But those episodes actually last forever. So you don't actually, once you've experienced a loss, it's not like the brain says, okay, we've recovered now, we don't need to worry about it. Those episodes are going to keep on coming up, but the experience of them changes over time. So I think the main thing is that it's adaptive and it's normal. If we don't experience grief, then we've got some really big questions that we need to ask about why we're even in mediation, I would be thinking, because we're looking at changing relationship. So there's going to be some loss there. In contrast to that, grieving is a process, and it's moving towards restoration to a meaningful life. So what would that mean?
I'm
restoration?
guessing.
Sorry.
Yeah, my understanding would be figuring out how do we live without that person in our life.
Yeah, absolutely. So our job in mediation could potentially be a part of that. Does anyone have, the next thing is about rumination. Does anyone know what rumination is, or could they like share a little bit about what they've seen with rumination?
Makes me think of a cow chewing its cud. I'm not sure.
It's what?
Of a cow chewing its cud. I don't know where I got that from. Going over and over things.
Yeah, it is. It's like a going over and over again, and it doesn't really change. And when we start looking at in therapy, therapists don't like rumination. They go, no, that's not good. And I wonder about how often we see it in our mediations. Do we actually recognize mediation? Do we actually recognize rumination in a mediation?
I think so. It's when people keep going back to the same thing that you thought has been discussed, and it's just back again.
Yeah, and they can't let it go.
Can't let it go.
Yeah. So grieving also has two parts to it. There is a drawing of the past into it. There's a contrast between the past and the present. So I'm in the present moment, and there's something that's there that was there that I've got to now make sense of. But there's also a present into the future, and two separate processes that are going on. So I wonder, how does that relate to our FDR models at the moment, the past, present, and the future?
Well, we're trying to be future focused, and there may not be a lot of time for dealing with rumination.
Yeah. So because what Mary's suggesting here is that going from past to the present is not the same as rumination. So there is an element of the past that needs to be balanced out. And I agree, as mediators, I remember my training was, as soon as someone goes in the past, get away from that. You're getting distracted. You need to be in the present. Let's focus about what's going to happen in the future, and we keep it locked in that space. The last point here is that grieving is a function of learning. And I think when I speak with media times, that's not really what we're there to do. Do you guys have ideas about learning in mediation? Is there a space for that?
Come on, people, don't just, I'm going to talk if you don't get in there and contribute as well.
I suppose the transformative aspect of mediation, the opportunity to grow and to make that a change, and that would be part of learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And absolutely. And I particularly like that idea with transformative processes compared to some of the other models.
I'll often, when I think grief is an issue, in my mediation, we'll talk about the cycle of grief. I call it the roller coaster of grief because people get strapped on and go around and around. But yeah, in a particularly when it looks like one's already finished grieving and dealt with that, and the other one's not.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's important.
I think for me, it's in that real screening and assessment stage where you can understand, as Joanne said, at what stage of the separation are you? And this is your space to, let's talk about that grief and loss, because then when we go into that mediation space, then whether that's going to be helpful there or whether it's not. So that's where I sit in that space there.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So like that space for learning, you're going to base it on how they go in accepting information in the intake.
Yeah, and then it's, I guess, also how then that can be managed, because naturally when they're sitting in a room, if they are sitting in a room together or seeing each other on a screen, those emotions do come out. So it's about accepting, allowing them to be in that space again, but then, okay, how are we going to manage that? What does that look like?
Yeah, cool. Okay, we'll continue on because there's a lot here. So Mary Frances presents a metaphor. So I'm just going to read this out to you. So just assume that someone has stolen your dining room table. So imagine waking up thirsty in the middle of the night. You get out of bed and head to the kitchen to get a glass of water. Down the hall, you cross the dark dining room toward the kitchen. At the moment, your hip should bump into the card corner of the dining room table, and you feel, what is it that you feel? Nothing. You are suddenly aware that you don't feel anything in that spot at the height of your hip. That is what you're aware of, not feeling something specific. The absence of something is what has drawn your attention to what is weird, as we usually think of something as drawing our attention. How can nothing draw our attention? So what she's saying is we're walking in two worlds at the same time. Like, we're doing this all the time. This is not like just when we're in grief. All the time we're walking in two worlds, one in which we are experiencing the feedback of our senses, and the other is a virtual reality map which you have in your head. And you're using the virtual reality map to navigate your world more so than your senses. So think about this next time you use Google Maps to go somewhere. How much attention is on the sound telling you where to go compared to the attention of what is around you? It relies on prior information and has detection built in for discrepancies and opportunities for changes to error. So Mary continues on by saying that nobody knows what it is like to walk through life without the other person, even when planning for loss ahead of time. And that's in chapter 1. So given that we're mediators and we're asking our parties to think ahead and plan, what assumptions are we asking our parents to make? Does anyone have any ideas now that I've just dropped a bit of a bombshell on you?
What the other person is experiencing?
Say that again, sorry.
What the other person is experiencing, the other party in the mediation might be experiencing. So when you say nobody knows what it's like to walk through this life without the other person, the thought that I have is that even, let's say it's a husband and a wife, my immediate thoughts go to that husband is making assumptions about what the wife is going through, walking through life without him, and she's making the same assumptions of him, and they don't understand each other's position, they don't understand each other's experience of that loss.
Yeah, that's absolutely what we're asking them to do. But in actual fact, it doesn't work. Like, it's not really addressing the dilemma that's going on in their mind that's creating the distress. So the distress is coming from, my brain is telling me that there is something here, but there's not something here. How do I marry that up? And in response to that, we're then saying, hurry up, plan ahead. Can you see that right there? Our assumption at the start is, it presents a challenge to them that I wasn't aware of until I read this book. I just went, oh, bit of a problem here. Continuing on from that, neuroscience tends to use animals to learn about the brain. They provide stimuli and notice where brain regions emit a charge and take note of those areas that are most common. So the hippocampus is known to be an area used for memory towards the centre of the limbic system. And if you've done any work with trauma, you'd be familiar with that area. From rat studies, it was found that specific neurons would be activated when the rat was exposed to a physical object in their environment, and these were known as object cells. Interestingly, when the specific object was removed in the study that Mary refers to, it was a blue tower in the box. When the blue tower was removed, another cell, object trace cell, also fired. So the brain literally responds to the lack of a stimuli as a stimuli. And in the searching for something, rat studies also help with understanding that we do not learn by way of one stimuli then the next in a sequential order. What we do is places are mapped with place cells so that a rat can find the reward quickly without having to match each stimuli. And so they can be placed, the rat can be placed anywhere in the room and they'll be able to find the reward without having to go next to the blue tower and this thing. The question is with that is if we've got cells there, neurons that are connected up before the prefrontal cortex, before our thinking part, and they're constantly going, is this thing here? What happens when this thing is not here? What are we actually saying? What's actually happening when we're asking a parent to reflect? So Mary Frances describes the mapping of space, time, and closeness. And she describes it through the attachment of a baby with their mother and how this evolves over time and space. When born, there is literal dependency of the baby for its needs to be met and cries to communicate. The carer responds attuned to meet those needs. And this is close to proximity and it's done quickly. Closeness can be considered as the neurobiological representation for attachment, the responding to another when they need us and the expectation that they will respond to us when we are in need. The parent-child dyad is an expectation of the child and the responding of the parent. The child adjusts from physical closeness and touch to in space through the use of sight and sound. And in the first year, the baby adjusts to time with the establishment of working memory. Mum was here, but now she's not, and will then cry out for closeness. The knowledge that mum will return develops over repetitions, and so attachment extends over time. The healthy adult intimate partnership is likely to be very different. We would hope that expectations for meeting each other's needs may be different from a child. Both adults may have ways to meet each other's needs and ask for help, and in doing so, encode and strengthen or weaken their experience of closeness. So when thinking about our models for mediation, what ways at the moment do we use space, time, and closeness? Think about how you set up your process. Is there options there that you can change?
We use a genogram sometimes to help visually map.
So that's to map the closeness, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. What about
breakout rooms? If you can do that, if they need a break or if they need some space just to calm a little bit.
Yeah. Breakout rooms, whether we put it online, whether they see each other. And with time, we might do a shuttle. We might even extend it out further. We might do a mediation one and then do another mediation down the track. So we're constantly working in this, with these dimensions. We're working with space, we're working with time, and we can work with closeness. Then when thinking about that, the other thing when I thought a little bit more deeply about it also that I came up with is that when a mediation ends up with an agreement, we end up with a piece of paper, and what does it define? I think it defines time, it defines space, and by doing that, we try to navigate closeness. So we're saying, so closeness is I will be able to meet your needs in this way, and you will be able to meet needs for me this way.
Yeah, it actually does, and when there's conflict and that we define how close they're allowed to get. You have to drop the kids off on the street, don't come to the door, and all sorts of things. Those, boundaries are another way of thinking about them.
Yeah. So, but I think what Mary's kind of presenting, or to me, what I hear when I think about that, is that these are processes that are already going on in the brain at a subconscious level, and we're trying to navigate in that as well. So there's a question there for them that each of them need to experience at the same time. And I wonder about how do we then use our tools to make it so that that process is easier for them.
Yeah, because when you think about it through this perspective, there's often a rejection, like people don't want closeness, like there's a real pushing away, maybe depending on where they are in their grief process.
Yeah.
And
also, how do you maintain closeness with the kids? Because that's the next layer to it.
And we know there's often huge amounts of grief for a parent who's not spending time with their kids.
She introduces yearning. So when we're young, we develop a mechanism called object permanence, which is you have a child and you show them a ball and they put it underneath a cup, and they will know that the ball will be underneath the cup. So the idea of an attachment existing and then simply not existing isn't a neurological function. The figure of attachment goes somewhere in relation to space and time. When they are not there in space and time, we automatically do what is habitual to connect. We check our phone, we SMS, we call, we check their room, we search for. When these efforts do not provide us with closeness of us seeking, what happens? I suggest that we experience confusion and distress, and if it's not addressed, a fear of death can come up, and it can come up quite quickly, and it's automatic. So they may not necessarily go, oh my God, I'm fearing death at the moment, but the sensation that you're seeing in front of you might be quite intense. Mary describes research on prairie voles, both prairie voles and mountain voles, and the use of oxytocin and vasopressin. When oxytocin was blocked, they didn't develop a pair bond. Prairie voles have more receptors for oxytocin in the nucleus accumbens, and we develop receptors based on genes. However, the activation of genes is reliant on enzymes, and this happens when the prairie voles interacting with their mate. So with bonding, creating a memory, setting up the epigenetic change that is permanent. So once bonded, their brain becomes primed to release the stress hormone, which is similar to cortisol in humans. Separation literally causes stress, and oxytocin operates to recover from this, elicited through when they lick each other. And it's relieved by that specific other. And when that happens, it strengthens the pathways for memories and the sensations associated with them. Persons rating higher on yearning show increased nucleus accumbens, common with the drive to meet other needs such as food and water. So Mary uses a questionnaire called the Situations of Loss Scale to compare bereavement to breakup and moving away, and found that yearning is equally present in each. So a word on intrusive thoughts. So intrusive thoughts are involuntary, normal, and they reduce over time. Remembering and bringing back to mind things that can be both negative and positive. When met with grief, it can become upsetting, and so our brain constantly creates reminders and helps us to remember what's most important, particularly more often during routine events. The contrast is mind wandering is a voluntary process, so it's less upsetting because there's choice, and it engages the executive function of the prefrontal cortex. So there's a thinking element to it. So have there been times where you can think of in the past where perhaps you may have seen someone experiencing yearning after what I've just described? What would it look like? Given that it's a need, it's like you can't have water or you can't have food. What would you do?
What do you think, guys? Or is there, did you understand what Mary was explaining? Do you have any clarifying questions?
Yeah, because it's quite complicated. It's not straightforward.
Rwanda?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is correct, but how I've seen it happen in my role is like, for instance, you have women who've survived situations of family violence, and then come the mediation, whether it's ordered through the court or whatever, the mediation process, and in terms of trying to negotiate any kind of agreement, that issue is they're yearning for the father in most cases, based on my experience, to step up basically and take additional responsibilities. So they're yearning for that father to be a bit more, take an active role and pay, engage with the medical expenses, etc. So they can't separate that from working out the arrangements for the child and what's in the best interest on long term. So all those issues in their mind together, they're conflated. And then there's that constant trying to redirect them when they're constantly, and that's how I see it at least, they're constantly yearning for the other parent to step up, basically for them to be able to consider a different future. I don't know if that's related to what you're saying. Is that?
I hadn't thought of it like that, but I think you're actually on, yeah, absolutely. Because I can think of times where it's like the voice changes. It's like a shriek that kind of comes up and there's an urgency with it. And they're like going, can you just try and understand what, and it's, you can't meet it. It's just really hard to connect with that. I don't think up until coming across this information, I never really thought about yearning as a thing other than, and I've got an example later on, so I might continue on.
Sorry, Mary, there's a couple of comments in the chat as well. So Bonnie said anything to get contact with, good or bad. So they're yearning for that connection, and how they get it's less important than getting it.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes when you think about, oh, why did they go to the school and do what they did? That makes no sense. And some of the decisions that they make, and if I think they're of sound mind, but when they did that, you're like, wow.
Yeah, I've seen that with grandparents, particularly, like a few times where they've done things like that. They've gone to the school because the parents aren't letting them have contact, and it caused a terrible problem for themselves and personal protective orders against them. But it's just such a strong need to see and
it is literally a need, and they can't, you know, how do you prevent a need and do it in a way that's safe, that they're able to?
Yeah, and as practitioners, we're thinking, how did you think that was going to turn out?
Yeah.
But they didn't. And I guess what you're saying is they didn't think. They were just.
They didn't think. It's an intrusive thought. They can't control it. Good luck to you trying to control it, sort of thing. So maybe thinking about, well, how do we prepare for those moments? Maybe, I don't know. This is me thinking.
I'll have some more strategies around. And Susie also shared about helpless and hopeless feelings that people might be.
Yep. When you can't actually make that connection. Absolutely. I'll continue on. And we've just answered that. Okay. So grief is different to yearning. So grief is more the experience of an event, such as a sound at a time of day is neurologically associated with an expectation. The brain is organised to predict, to fill in the gaps. So the expectation of something is experienced before the contrast is noticed and the lack of something. This contrast connects with the memory of loss, and hence the emotion of grief is experienced. This occurs quicker than thoughts and decision making. So each time the virtual map and the present moment contrast, along with some part of the recollection of the loss, an additional experience is encoded. As experiences add up, the presentation of grief changes, adapting to the present needs. So the difference between grief versus yearning is basically the memory of the loss. If you don't have an experience of a loss, then the yearning's going to happen and you're going to start searching for. But if you get that, does anyone have thoughts on that at the moment? Because I know when I first came across, it was like, oh my God, that's huge.
Yeah, I think so. I lost my mum to Alzheimer's, and I had a thought just before Christmas I was going to ring mum, and then I remembered, oh, she's dead. And yeah, so it's the memory sometimes goes missing, and
Yep.
yeah,
and that happens all, and that's part of the thing. That memory of the loss is ultra important, and each time that you connect with that the intrusive thought, or it may not be intrusive, but the virtual map, something not being there, and the loss, your present moment will then update that loss, that memory of loss as well. So it keeps on changing each time you engage with it. So when we experience an episode of grief, there is a choice. There is a choice to either avoid, and you can avoid in behavior or in thought. You can engage in the experience further through soothing, for example, or return to the moment of loss and pose questions like why and what if. And these are described to oscillate with different types of coping. They're all common and they're all completely normal, and they all achieve different goals. So she encourages us to be flexible in our responsiveness. Mary also stresses that when we numb episodes of grief, we're not able to adapt, we're not able to learn. So I'm just wondering, what sort of ways do we know that our clients might numb?
Addictive substances.
Yeah, what else?
Overworking.
Overworking.
Over exercising. Yeah.
Avoidance, shutting out.
Yeah.
overlaying with anger.
Yeah, yep. And we do it too in the room, in our mediations, when we're trying to contain things, sometimes where we might be trying to mute that thing that's actually yearning that's going on, while the other person's sitting in a moment of grief going, why can you just not connect?
Bonnie shared new partner. That's a really common one.
Yes. Yeah. So it's important that, I suppose, I'm not saying that we have to, but it poses the question, when we do our work, is our work actually grief work on some level? And as I share further, you'll see where there's potentials there. So this question here, what role does the memory of the mediation have for a parent?
Do you mean the mediation session that they've had?
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be the mediation session. It could be any part of the mediation. It could be how they experience the intake, or even they've got this document at the end of it. What relevance does that have for the parent in terms of moving forward? Moving forward being the grieving process.
Expectations is a huge one, because it's all about where have you got your expectations? Are you able to move along, or are you stuck, or are you, and can you, if you don't think that you've got a choice, then you will remain stuck. But if you can understand, and then you've got all these things coming into play, and if your mediation session wasn't exactly how you wanted it to be, or how the agreement at the end, then it's going to put you on one way or another of, I'm really angry still and I didn't get what I wanted, So I guess it's hard to answer.
Yeah, it's really open. It can go so many different ways, and it could be something that actually complicates the grief for them to continue on. It could also be a process of healing. Like, I think that's something that's been published a bit, that's been talked about, that mediation can actually be helpful for people to be able to say what they need to say.
Bonnie shared it could be closure, or it could be a reminder. Keep bringing it up when they think of it.
Yep. Especially whenever you look at that parenting plan. Like, you want them to look at that parenting plan and want them to, like, get a flashback of the mediation that was absolutely horrible, or do you want them to be able to be open each time they look at that plan?
Yeah.
And also too, what does that mean? What does that plan for one party? It would be this is their road to some time, and this is their road to some positive things, and then the other party just doesn't even come to the party. So then they've, again, you go back to their expectations, being let down. What's the piece of paper worth anyway? So there's a lot of different,
shared, we had a session a couple of weeks ago. She did some research with participants in mediation, and one of the stories she shared, the person had 2 mediation sessions. The first was only a couple of weeks after they separated, and he had no recollection, like no memory at all. He could not. He said, I don't know what happened. I can't remember it in the slightest. So timing, it brings us back to an element of time that you've really highlighted.
Yeah.
But it's difficult when people are at different stages. One's ready to get stuff sorted and the others, can't.
So she actually, Mary talks about that there is actually no stages. So now it's just more, and this kind of goes into that. So it's just an ongoing, it's not about the emotion. The emotion is more about response to the memory. As the memories progress and change, then the experiences change. So I think we mentioned anger and guilt before. She talks about that when there's a fracture in any relationship, when there's a fracture to closeness, what happens is that we seek to repair it. You can feel hurt by something that your friend says, for example, and you may feel something different depending on the circumstances, but it is more likely to be going to support you to lean into the closeness and to engage. So through the engagement, when done well and reciprocated, the relationship becomes stronger and new parameters for space, time, and closeness are rearranged. Changes to closeness is normal, and I would think that we would probably all agree to that. So she talks about anger as being a method that we use to repair closeness. Say your friend's done something wrong by you, you might, because you value the relationship, you're more likely to lean in and approach and say, hey, look, not happy with this. Whereas guilt, on the other hand, is when that you're reflecting that you probably missed an opportunity to repair. So there are times that parents may experience an abrupt loss of closeness. Perhaps something in a parenting plan didn't go as expected, or there's a suggestion that there is a suggestion in the mediation regarding a child-parent relationship, or it could even be an intrusive thought. I might actually, because we're run out of time, I'm wondering what you would like to do now, because, I've got another 9 slides and it goes deeper and deeper.
Maybe a part 2 next week.
I suppose it's up for discussion. Like, is this intriguing enough that we continue on? Because there is a lot more there, and I feel that if I keep going, we're gonna we're going to get, I'm trying to find a place to wind it up.
Yeah, we'd be happy to host a second session, and particularly maybe after people have had a chance to reflect on some of what you shared, and at the end of it, look at, well, what can we do? How can we, is there something we can do to modify our process and be more responsive? And that's probably where you're going. Anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's where we're going.
Yeah, I'm seeing a few part twos would be great, and some nods. So
Okay.
yeah, we can definitely. So is this a good place to break, Mary? Is there any final thoughts you want people to?
I suppose at this point, I'm quite curious about if there's anything that anyone has felt shocked by or confused by at this point. Knowing that there is no grief cycle, that there is that this is automatic and we can't fight it. You're going to lose a battle if you try and take this thing on, because they're not even going to tell you that they're experiencing it if there's no trust there. Is there any changes that anyone would like to make to their own practice, knowing what they know so far?
So Susie just shared that, you know, if we're in this compassionate role and using empathy would help. So, you know, what do you see as the role of empathy in all of this?
And that is part of the next, it will go into that. Yeah.
And Bonnie, the same about protocol for dealing with grief. So, yeah, what do we do? Because it's, well, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, you have hope for us, do you, Mary?
Not as much as I would like, but a little bit. Yeah.
Excellent. And I've put right in the beginning, and some people may have missed a link to the source material that Mary's been talking about, if anyone's interested in it. On
we'll go to the last page because the information is on the last page.
Cool. Yeah. And maybe we can, with a bit of extra time, we can workshop some guidelines or something like that, which is my suggestion, which I thought was fabulous.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Mary. There's a lot of food for thought there. I'm going to get the book and look at. I might have to revise the way I'm talking about grief with clients.
Oh yeah, me too. Don't you worry about that. I'm like, I'm walking a fine line at the moment. When I hear something, I'm like, is that what you're actually talking about? And then they go, actually, that is what I'm talking about. I go, oh wow.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll liaise with Mary, and we'll plan another session to dive a little bit deeper, and then come up maybe with some ideas that we can apply in our practice when we identify these issues. And lots of thank yous and coming through.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.